They thought it would just be another night on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. A few jokes, some laughter, maybe a headline or two. But when Donald Trump walked onto that stage, everything changed. The band stopped smiling. The audience leaned forward. And behind Jimmy's playful grin, something serious was brewing. Trump waved to the crowd, his signature confidence filling the room like static. Jimmy smiled, the kind that hides thunder behind it. Because tonight wasn't about jokes. Tonight, the laughs were about to die. Mr. Trump, Jimmy began, voice friendly but sharp beneath the humor. You've been on this stage before, but this time the world's different. Tell me, do you still think you made America great again? The crowd went silent. Trump grinned. I didn't just make it great, Jimmy, I saved it. Everyone knows that. The ratings were tremendous. People love me, you know it. The audience half laughed, half stared. Even the roots stopped tapping. Jimmy tilted his head, smile still there, but colder now. You sure they love you, Don? Or do they just love watching you? The room froze. That line hit like lightning. Trump blinked, surprised, not used to being punched with a joke that drew blood. People respect me, Trump shot back. That's not something you'd understand, you tell jokes for a living. Jimmy's grin didn't fade. Maybe. But tonight the joke's telling itself. Guess. Real ones. You could feel the tension crawl across the room like electricity. Trump leaned forward, jaw tightening. You invited me here to make fun of me? Jimmy's voice dropped low, almost serious. No, duh. I invited you here because the truth sounds better under bright lights. The audience went wild, cheers, shouts, disbelief. Trump's smirk wavered. You comedians always twist things. Jimmy's tone softened, almost sympathetic. Maybe, or maybe it's just hard to laugh when you're not in control of the punchline anymore. Silence. Cameras zoomed in. The world was watching a talk show turn into a showdown. Narrator tone, deep cinematic whisper. That night, laughter wasn't comedy anymore. It was confrontation, power versus presence. And before it was over, one man would walk off that stage, while the other would walk straight into history. The laughter that usually filled Jimmy Fallon's studio had vanished. No jokes now. No sketches. Only two men, one known for charm, the other for chaos, sitting inches apart beneath blinding lights. The crowd waited, breathless. They'd come for entertainment, but they stayed for tension. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, still smiling, but his eyes had sharpened. Mr. Trump, he said, his tone polite, you've built your whole image around confidence. But tell me something, has it ever cost you anything? Trump smirked. Cost me? Nothing. I've won every fight, every deal, every election. Confidence isn't a cost, Jimmy. It's the reason I'm sitting here and not watching from home like everyone else. The audience murmured, half laughter, half disbelief. But Jimmy wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned forward, hands clasped. Maybe. But sometimes, confidence isn't power, it's armor. The crowd reacted, a wave of gasps and quiet claps. Trump chuckled, low and uneasy. You're a funny guy, Fallon. Stick to jokes. Jimmy grinned, but there was no humor in it. You know, I used to think the same, that making people laugh meant avoiding the truth. But now I think laughter just makes the truth easier to swallow. Trump straightened up, his tone sharper. You think this is funny? You think humiliating me gets you ratings? Jimmy's smile faded. Donald, you don't need my help for that. The world's been watching you long before tonight. The highs, the tweets, the chaos. You made yourself the show. The audience clapped. Trump's face tightened. You're twisting everything, he said. I came here to talk about success, and you're making it personal. Jimmy nodded. Because success is personal. It's not what you build, it's what you break along the way. The room froze. Trump leaned forward, voice rising. You sound just like the fake news. Always trying to make me the villain. Jimmy didn't move. His voice dropped low. Maybe you're not the villain, Don. Maybe you're just scared the story doesn't end with you winning. That line hit like thunder. The crowd gasped. Even the cameramen looked at each other. For a second, Trump didn't speak, And that silence said more than any headline. Then he laughed, forced, defensive. You talk big for a guy who hides behind jokes. Jimmy's eyes locked on his. Maybe. But at least my laughter doesn't need to be loud to matter. The crowd erupted. But beneath the applause, the air was shifting. The balance of power was tilting. Trump adjusted his cufflinks, pretending calm. You think people will remember this, Jimmy? You'll thank me for these ratings. Jimmy's expression softened, almost sad. Maybe I will. But I'd rather be remembered for truth than for trends. For a second, no one spoke. The lights hummed, the audience silent. And then, slowly, Jimmy said, You know what I think, Don? The real difference between us is that you perform for applause. I perform to connect. Trump blinked. You mean you perform for approval? Jimmy shook his head. No. For understanding. Something you can't fake, not with billions, not with power. The camera zoomed in. 2 faces, 2 Americas. One built on pride, one built on reflection. And though Jimmy smiled again, the room could feel it. Control had shifted. That night, for the first time, the crowd didn't cheer for jokes. They cheered for truth. Because laughter had turned into lightning, and Jimmy Fallon, the man who made the world laugh, had just made it stop and listen. By now, the studio didn't feel like a late-night show anymore. It felt like a court of truth, and the audience had become the jury. The laughter that once bounced off those walls was gone. In its place, a heavy, electric quiet that buzzed in everyone's chest. Trump sat stiff in his chair, lips tight, eyes darting between Jimmy and the crowd. He'd faced presidents, CEOs, entire networks, but this was different. This wasn't a reporter trying to trap him. This was a comedian turning courage into a mirror. Jimmy's tone softened, so calm it was dangerous. Mr. Trump, you've always said you fight for the people. Tell me, when was the last time you listened to them? The room froze. A few people inhaled too loud. You could hear someone's bracelet jingle from the front row. Trump laughed, that familiar, uneasy laugh. I listen every day, Jimmy. I know what people want. They want strength, not sympathy. Jimmy leaned closer, elbows on the desk, eyes unwavering. There's a difference between hearing applause and hearing pain. The crowd gasped. That line landed like a gut punch. Even Questlove looked up from his drum kit, eyebrows raised. Trump blinked, caught off guard. I built jobs. I made America rich again. You call that pain? Jimmy's voice dropped to a whisper. No. I call it forgetting that people aren't prophets. The audience erupted, half cheering, half stunned. It wasn't entertainment anymore, it was exposure. Trump's jaw tightened. You invited me here to insult me on national TV? Jimmy shook his head slowly. I invited you to be honest on national TV. The crowd murmured, hanging on every syllable. Even the camera operators were shaking slightly. They knew they were filming a moment that would live forever. Trump leaned back, eyes narrowing. You think you're better than me? You think a few clever lines make you smarter? Jimmy smiled, but this time it wasn't humor, it was heartbreak. Noda. But I think listening makes you stronger. Gasps again, the kind that ripple through a crowd when truth walks in uninvited. Trump's voice cracked, louder now. You people used to cheer for me. You loved me. I built the skyline you live under. Jimmy's tone stayed low, piercing through the noise. And maybe that's why people stopped looking up. The audience froze. Not a sound. Not a breath. Even the stage lights seemed to dim for a heartbeat. Trump clenched his fists, his voice trembling. You're twisting my words. You're trying to make me look weak. Jimmy tilted his head slightly. You're doing that yourself, Don. I'm just giving it a microphone. The room reacted, gasps, claps, shouts, but mostly silence. That thick, unforgettable silence that means something real has just happened. Trump's lips twitched, fighting between anger and disbelief. You'll regret this, Fallon. Everyone who crosses me does. Jimmy's expression didn't change. I'm not crossing you, Don. I'm just refusing to kneel. The crowd went wild, standing, shouting, clapping, but Jimmy didn't look away. For a long, unbroken moment, the two men just stared. The king of volume versus the prince of calm. And in that stillness, the audience saw it, the exact second when laughter died and reality took its place. It wasn't a show anymore. It was a reckoning. For the first time in years, the man who always controlled the conversation couldn't control the silence. And as cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker in Trump's eyes, the world realized something no script could write. Sometimes, the loudest man in the room loses to the one who simply refuses to raise his voice. That was the moment the audience stopped laughing and started listening. The silence after Jimmy's last line hit harder than any applause ever could. For a long moment, no one moved. The crowd didn't dare breathe. Even the camera operators froze, afraid a single noise might shatter what they were witnessing. Trump's face tightened. His jaw locked. His hands clutched the edge of the chair, knuckles white. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the loss of control. And everyone in that studio could feel it. He leaned forward, his voice trembling but still loud enough to echo. "You think this is funny, Jimmy? You think humiliating me makes you a hero?" Jimmy's expression stayed calm. "No, duh. I think it just makes the truth harder to hide." That line cracked something. You could see it, the flicker of fury behind Trump's eyes. The charm disappeared, replaced by raw, unchecked anger. "You talk about truth?" he snapped. "You're a clown. A puppet for ratings. You make jokes while real men build nations." The audience gasped. It wasn't the usual shock and laugh moment. This time, the fear was real. Jimmy leaned back, unbothered. Real men don't need to shout to prove they built something. The crowd erupted, half in awe, half in disbelief. Trump's face turned crimson. His voice rose, shaky with rage. "You don't know what I've done. I've given more to this country than any comedian ever could." Jimmy nodded slightly. "Maybe. But what you take away while giving, that's what history remembers." The room froze again. You could feel the temperature drop, the kind of cold that comes before a storm. Trump stood up suddenly, his chair scraping the floor with a screech that pierced through the silence. "You think you're so righteous, Fallon? You think you're better than me?" Jimmy's tone stayed low, steady. "I don't think I'm better, Don. I just think I'm not afraid to face myself." Guess. You could almost hear hearts pounding in the audience. Trump jabbed a finger toward him. "You invited me here to humiliate me. You wanted your little viral clip? Fine, you've got it." Jimmy didn't blink. "Funny thing about viral moments, Don, they don't make you famous. They show people who you really are." The crowd murmured, whispering to one another. This wasn't comedy anymore, it was history. Trump's voice broke through the noise. "I've been attacked my whole life. By the media, by liars, by people like you who don't understand greatness." Jimmy's reply came soft, almost sorrowful. "Maybe we just understand humility better." That was it. The breaking point. Trump slammed his hand on the desk, the microphone cracking with feedback. "You're done. This show is done," he shouted. "You'll regret this, Fallon. I made TV great again, and I can destroy it just as fast." The audience gasped as he ripped off his mic. The clip hit the floor with a sharp, metallic clink. The sound echoed like thunder in a storm that had finally arrived. Security shifted nervously. Producers whispered behind the glass. But Jimmy? He didn't move. Not an inch. "Don't go, Don," he said quietly. "Walking away doesn't end the conversation, it just proves you couldn't finish it." Trump froze mid-step. For a heartbeat, the world waited. He turned slightly, eyes burning. Then, without a word, he stormed toward the exit. The doors slammed open. Then, silence. That heavy, unforgettable silence that fills the air when pride finally collapses under its own weight. Jimmy exhaled slowly, the first movement in nearly 30 seconds. He looked into the camera, calm, composed, unshaken. And with the softest voice imaginable, he said, "Well, that wasn't the punchline I expected." Laughter broke, nervous at first, then louder, freer, like pressure finally released. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just another talk show moment. It was a mirror held up to power. The night laughter met pride, and pride broke first. Because in that studio, under the hottest lights in America, one truth stood taller than any tower. When ego explodes, calm becomes the loudest sound in the room. The sound of that studio door slamming echoed across America. It wasn't just noise, it was history being written in real time. For a full minute, nobody spoke. The cameras kept rolling. Jimmy sat still, his hands folded, his face unreadable, while the audience stared at the empty stage where Donald Trump had stood just seconds ago. The air was thick, that strange silence that comes after an explosion. Jimmy took a slow breath, lifted his head, and finally said, "Oh, I guess that's one way to end an interview." Laughter broke through, hesitant at first, then stronger. Not cruel laughter, just release. Relief. The pressure of the last 10 minutes cracked like glass. But across the world, that sound traveled faster than any joke ever had. Within minutes, the footage hit the internet. TikTok, YouTube, X, CNN, everywhere. Hashtag Trump walks off Tonight Show. Hashtag Fallon versus Trump. Hashtag silence wins. 3 hashtags. 1 cultural earthquake. Clips replayed in slow motion, Trump's glare, Jimmy's calm, the mic hitting the floor. Someone edited it with dramatic music. Another looped Jimmy's line, "Walking away doesn't end the conversation," over footage of Trump storming out. Within hours, it had 50 million views. Narrator tone, sharper now, echoing global reaction. Fox News called it a setup. CNN called it the most shocking late-night moment in decades. BBC said it was the night humor met history. And social media? Social media turned it into a movement. TikTok creators made edits with captions like, "When calm defeats chaos." "When the punchline becomes the truth." "When silence wins." Jimmy's face, calm, still, unmoved, became a meme, a poster, a symbol. People shared it not because it was funny, but because it felt real. Backstage, producers panicked. Phones buzzed nonstop. Executives whispered about ratings and sponsors. But Jimmy? He stayed seated, his eyes on the desk, breathing quietly, the same calm that had shaken a man who once led a nation. A producer whispered, "Do you want to cut to commercial?" Jimmy smiled faintly. "No. I think the moment speaks for itself." And it did. Across the country, televisions flickered as millions watched the replay, not for laughs this time, but for truth. That night, something changed. People didn't just watch the clip, they shared it like a mirror of their own lives. The boss who shouted. The friend who never listened. The calm that finally broke the noise. Comments flooded in by the millions. When Trump yelled, "I saw my past." When Jimmy stayed calm, "I saw who I want to be." That line went viral itself. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about power and peace, ego and empathy. And everyone recognized a little bit of themselves on that stage. News anchors replayed the scene frame by frame. Body language experts analyzed every blink, every breath. Leadership coaches called it a masterclass in control. And through it all, Jimmy said nothing. No press statement. No apology. No post. He just ended the show with one quiet line before the credits rolled. Sometimes, silence is the best response to noise. By sunrise, the clip had hit 200 million views. By noon, the headlines had changed the conversation. And by night, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a walkout. It was a wake-up call. Because when a man known for shouting walked out in rage, and a man known for laughter stayed silent, the world finally realized the loudest moment of the year had no sound at all. The morning after the walkout, the world woke up to chaos. Every screen, every feed, every headline, one clip, one sound, one silence. Donald Trump storming off The Tonight Show. Jimmy Fallon sitting still. No music. No jokes. Just truth hanging in the air. CNN ran the replay on loop. The moment a joke became justice. Fox News fired back. Fallon ambushed Trump for views. The BBC called it television's tipping point. And social media? It was war. Hashtag Trump walkout Tonight Show. Hashtag Fallon truth. Hashtag silence speaks. 3 hashtags ruled the internet for 72 hours straight. TikTok edits filled the feed. Jimmy's calm face over cinematic music, slow-motion close-ups of Trump's walkout, captions flashing. Strength isn't volume. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Calm always wins. YouTube reaction channels lit up overnight. Podcasters broke down every second, every twitch of Trump's hand, every blink from Jimmy, every line of dialogue like scripture. Psychologists, journalists, comedians, everyone wanted to define what just happened. Because it wasn't just a TV moment. It was a mirror. People weren't just watching two men clash. They were watching the world argue with itself. Comments flooded in under the millions of reposts. When Trump shouted, "I saw my father." When Jimmy stayed quiet, "I saw strength." When he walked away, "I saw myself in every argument I never finished." One comment went viral across all platforms. "He didn't win the debate. He won the silence." That line alone hit 20 million likes. It became the message of the week, whispered in classrooms, workplaces, dinner tables. Because everyone understood what it meant. You don't have to be the loudest to be the most powerful. News outlets called it the fall of showmanship. Psychology professors used it as a lecture case. Corporate trainers turned it into seminars about emotional intelligence. Even celebrities joined the wave. "Jimmy just taught the world how to stay calm when chaos enters the room," wrote Dwayne Johnson. "That's leadership," tweeted Taylor Swift. "The night noise lost," said Ellen DeGeneres. Meanwhile, Trump's team released a short statement. President Trump was ambushed by a biased host. This was not an interview, it was an attack. But the world had already chosen its narrative. Because the clip spoke for itself, no words, no spin, no edits could change it. 4 days, late-night shows replayed it, each with a different spin. But Jimmy? He stayed silent. No follow-up segment. No explanation. Just a small smile when an audience member yelled, "We're with you, Jimmy," during the next episode. That smile said everything. It wasn't pride, it was peace. He'd turned confrontation into clarity. TikTok creators called it, "the night the internet grew up." Because for once, people didn't argue over who was right. They paused to ask who listened. In a world addicted to noise, Jimmy Fallon reminded millions that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. It's what real control sounds like. The aftershock wasn't chaos, it was calm. And it spread everywhere. From New York to Los Angeles, from small-town diners to college campuses, one message echoed louder than Trump's exit, louder than Jimmy's words. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. By the end of the week, The Tonight Show hit record-breaking viewership. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered, it was the narrative. Because Jimmy Fallon didn't just win an interview. He redefined what power looks like in the age of noise. And for once, the world didn't scroll away. It listened. Days passed. But the echo of that night refused to fade. Every replay, every headline, every reaction video, all led back to that same moment. Trump's anger, Jimmy's calm, and the silence that spoke louder than both. What happened on that golden stage became more than entertainment. It became a reflection. A mirror held up to a noisy world asking one simple question. What kind of power do you believe in? In living rooms across America, families rewatched that moment. Some laughed. Some argued. Some just sat there, realizing they weren't watching a celebrity feud, they were watching a truth being revealed. Because that night, something shifted. A man known for dominance met a man known for humor, and the world saw what happens when ego meets empathy, and empathy doesn't flinch. Narrator tone deepens, slower and emotional. For years, Trump's image was built on volume. Outshouting, overpowering, and outlasting. But Jimmy didn't play that game. He didn't shout back. He didn't compete. He just stayed still. And that stillness turned into a storm. People didn't remember what Trump said, they remembered how Jimmy didn't react. They didn't quote the insults, they quoted the calm. Because that's what real strength looks like. The power to stay grounded when everything around you is trying to shake. Psychologists studied it. Motivational speakers quoted it. Colleges dissected it. But ordinary people? They just felt it. A construction worker in Chicago posted, "I used to think strength meant shouting louder. But after that interview, I realized strength is staying steady when someone tries to shake your soul." That comment alone reached millions. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about humanity, the clash between control and chaos, pride and peace, noise and truth. Jimmy Fallon didn't win by fighting back. He won by standing firm. He showed that sometimes, power isn't what you say, it's what you don't. And that became the real legacy of the clash. Not who shouted louder. Not who walked off first. But who stayed present. Because in that moment, the world learned something it had forgotten. Silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's leadership. It's the calm that disarms chaos. A week later, Jimmy finally broke his silence. No interviews. No drama. Just a short message at the end of his monologue. He smiled faintly at the camera and said, "You don't need to win every argument to stand for something. Sometimes you just need to stay still and let truth finish the sentence." The crowd stood in applause, not for a joke, not for a punchline, but for a lesson. Because that night, and the days that followed, Jimmy Fallon stopped being the funny guy. He became the reminder the world didn't know it needed. You can build towers, run countries, own headlines, but if you lose control of yourself, you lose the room. That's the real legacy of that night. Not the walkout, not the silence, but the message it left behind. In a world addicted to noise, calm still wins. If this story made you think, made you feel, or reminded you what real strength looks like, don't just scroll away. Backhand index pointing right, hit subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal truth, test power, and remind us that silence is not weakness, it's mastery. Speech balloon comment below. Who do you think truly won that night? The one who shouted or the one who stayed calm? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that calm doesn't mean quiet, it means control.